Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 8th, 2019. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Steve Wilkes and I hang out with Mike Tonsmeire, the Mad Fermentationist and co-founder of Sapwood Cellars. We pick Mike's brain on brewing hoppy beers, sour beers, and catch up on his journey as a professional brewer. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows. And if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs, our brewer's logbooks, and other Basic Brewing gear. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. We have a cool Basic Brewing app on iTunes and Amazon.com. And we're found all over the place where fine podcasts are served up. And if you do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment, they say that new listeners will find us that way. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And thanks to everybody who's helping out there. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Coming up next in the queue for Basic Brewing video is a Steve recipe. It's the beer that we brewed way back for Big Brew Day at Steve's shop. He calls it an Ozark Amber, and it was Steve's first no-chill beer to brew. He modified his recipe to put all of his late boil hops in the fermenter as dry hops because of the no-chill. It was a tasty beer, spoiler alert. Financial subscribers will see that episode before everybody else, and upper-tier supporters will get a behind-the-scenes video that will not be made public, so exclusive to them. I went back in the archives the other night to listen to the first taste that we had of no-chill beers, literally. It was back in 2012 in an episode that we recorded when we were in Seattle for HomebrewCon. Bob Stimsky and Noam Shalev brewed up an experiment comparing beers brewed traditionally with no-chill beers. And the gist of the experiment was that we couldn't tell the difference between them. It blew our minds at the time. Now, I'm glad to have no-chill brewing as a regular part of my brewing toolkit. So you learn something new every day, even 7 years ago. Hey, here's a question. What do these breweries have in common? Cycle Brewing, Thin Man, Wild Leap, Dwinell Country Ales, and Endy Brewing Company. Well, they all have beers featured in the month of August by our sponsor, Tavour. Tavour is a way to select delicious craft beers that you may not be able to find in your area and have them delivered to you. It's not a Beer of the Month club where someone chooses beer for you and it's kind of a surprise when it comes to your door. You only pay for the beer that you choose over the course of a month. Signing up for Tavour is free. Just create an account at Tavour.com. That's T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com. And download their iPhone or Android app, and you'll receive notifications for 2 new beers each day that are available for purchase with in-depth tasting notes from Philip at Tavour. If you're not interested in these beers you see, no worries. Just skip the ones you don't want. However, when you see something you do want, and you will, don't wait. Just click it to get it and add it to your crate. Your beer arrives fresh every few weeks, allowing you enough time to fill a box and pay the least shipping. So why don't you check it out? It doesn't cost anything to sign up, and there is no obligation to purchase anything. In fact, if I can ask you a favor, go to Tavour.com, T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, or download the app. And when you sign up, enter the promo code Basic Brewing. That's all one word. And you'll get $10 off your first shipment of $25 or more. And they'll know that you heard it here. Again, it's free to sign up, and there's no obligation to purchase. Sign in to Tavour.com, T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, or with the Tavour app and enter Basic Brewing as the promo code. And thanks to the folks at Tavour for supporting the show. Let's take a look into the mailbag. Brent has a twist on the recipe that I use to brew the beers for our Hop Sampler series. Brent says, I have really been enjoying these small batch hop samplers. Thanks, Brent. There's so many hops out there, it is hard to keep up. And in a beer with 3 or 4 hops, it can be hard to tell what each one contributes. I felt like I was not getting as much hop aroma as I would like, so I made a slight tweak to your process. I just opened up my first bottle brewed with that process, and it's great. That could be due to the Mosaic hops, but I feel like this has a better balance of hop bitterness, flavor, and aroma. Brent says, what I did, add 1/3 ounce of hops and boil for 10 minutes. Add 1/3 ounce hops at flame out. Move to the sink and start to chill. And he doesn't do a hop stand that way. Add 1/3 ounce hops into the fermenter, added to the fermenter before adding the chilled wort. Brent says this actually cuts out 10 minutes from the process. Wow. Well, thanks, Brent. I bet that's a tasty beer. Probably a little more, sort of well-rounded and more of a depth of flavors than my recipe maybe, because you're using the hops at the different times. I think my recipe really focuses on the potentially juicy hop flavors from the different hops, and I'll bet that Brent's has a stronger base bitterness and probably aroma as well. So, food for thought on future experiments and brewing tasty beers. Well, speaking of tasty beers, let's talk about our friends and sponsors, Desiree and Dave from High Gravity in Tulsa. You know, High Gravity sells a wide variety of electric brewing systems because they are pioneers in that area, but they're also a full-service homebrew shop. If you go to highgravitybrew.com, you can see the featured ingredient kits, for example, that they have for offer, like Driller Light, which is a pun based on the oil industry there in Tulsa, and a very quaffable summer beer, Itsy Bitsy Hophead IPA, which is a sessionable IPA, and Summer Blonde, which is another easy drinking beer for the hot weather. You can get these kits as all grain or extract, and some of them you can customize with different things. And of course, you can build your own beer using your own recipe using the Build Your Own Beer page on highgravitybrew.com. That is very fun to play with. High Gravity has what you need to brew a tasty summer beverage. Check it all out at family-owned and operated highgravitybrew.com. And if you use the code EBC75BB, you can save $75 off your electric brewing gear purchase. That's at highgravitybrew.com. Okay, one of the benefits of HomebrewCon is you get to see people that you only see at HomebrewCon. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's just passing in the hall, but sometimes you get to sit down and chat, as we did with Mad Fermentationist, co-founder of Sapwood Cellars, and author of American Sour Beers, Mike Tonsmeire. Mike Tonsmeire, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
It's always a pleasure to be in an anonymous meeting room somewhere in America with you, James.
Steve Wilkes?
I wouldn't go that far. But I will say it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we're just going to we're going to drink some beer, and we're just going to have a kind of a free-form conversation we're going to drink from the font of knowledge here, figuratively speaking, or literally speaking, because we have in front of us a can. What do we got?
So this is our second can release from Sapwood Cellars. It's a beer called Snip Snap. It's a Citra Galaxy double IPA, so it's literally just cheating. It's hard to make a bad Citra Galaxy double IPA.
We were talking to Stan Hieronymus in the hallway, and your name came up, and he said Mike Tonsmeire calls them cheating hops.
Yeah, cheater hops.
The cheater hops, and then there's cheaper hops or something like that. There's cheater hops and cheaper hops. So
yeah, it's a joke that Scott Janish, my partner who just wrote the new IPA, his self-published book. We've had this running joke for a while that there's no skill in making a Nelson Mosaic beer or a Citra Simcoe beer. Those hops are so good on their own that you don't have to worry about delicate balance with the yeast. Just add a bunch of great hops, it's going to make a good beer. If you can make a great New England IPA with Columbus and Equinaut and Centennial, that's skill. That is hop selection. That is timing. That is yeast interplay. That's where the skill of a great brewer is. We're just starting out. We don't mind cheating.
You got to pay the bills.
Okay, I'll pop this open. At least it sounds carbonated.
We have teeny tiny cups that we borrowed from Imperial Yeast and their booth, but We can refill them. I've only had one cup of beer. I've just filled it several times. It is orangish. It is definitely cloudy. Would you describe this as, it's not milky, I would say, but it's definitely hazy and cloudy?
No, we add Whirlflock, we add Biofine Clear, which is a vegan finding agent, intentionally to remove yeast, hop particulate. Our goal is not to have a can that you have to leave, 2 ounces behind in the end because it's sludge. Right. And that really the haze shouldn't be from, it's not a Hefeweizen, it shouldn't be yeast, it shouldn't be chunks of hops that are floating around are going to get stuck in your throat and give you that real hop burn kind of thing. Yeah.
So cheers. A soundless cheers.
I think this is a better can than the one I just opened for the previous podcast interview I was doing.
That's delicious.
So this is yours. Did you say your second?
Yes.
So are there issues that you're working on now with consistency or with the production process, and you're working the kinks out at this point?
Yeah, so that was actually the reason that we'd done this beer twice before on our own system, and it had gotten a lot of positive reviews and a lot of excitement. So for our first canned beer, we didn't want to sort of risk the reputation. We were doing it. We contract brewed this at a local brewery, and by contract brew, we were there. It was our recipe. It was our hops. We were there on brew day. We gave them all the timing instructions. But just anytime it's the same thing as brewing a batch on your system versus a friend's system. Right. And hopefully your friend knows that, I get a little bit more bitterness because the batch size is a little bit bigger, or my efficiency in the mash is a little bit lower, and so we'll have to add some more grain. But where we're using a new yeast strain, and it's always, is the mash temperature really comparable between two systems? Mm-hmm. That's honestly one of the things that's been a hard lesson for us, was that, mashing in can take 20 or 25 minutes for a double IPA, and the temperature during that 20 or 25 minutes is when most of the conversion's happening. So you have to be very careful that you're not, getting all your water in while you're still adding grain, because then you might be at 160 for the first 20 or 25 minutes. Even if you settle down to 152, the beta amylase is all baked off, and and so the first batch we just wanted to do a new beer. We did a beer called Cloud Palace that was Citron Simcoe. It turned out pretty well. The attenuation was a little bit lower than we wanted, so for this batch we lowered the attenuation. Carbonation was a little bit lower than we wanted, because you lose it a little bit more than you expect going into the cans, and so we sort of worked out all those kinks, and this batch has been really good. We've been super happy with working with Elder Pine. They're a terrific brewery. They opened just a little bit before us in Gaithersburg, and they do killer lagers, and they do smoked Kavaiaks, and they they do some hazy hoppy stuff too, but with Comet hops, and they're really doing some fun, interesting stuff. I love breweries that have their own thing and aren't just sort of jumping on whatever the trend du jour is.
It's a cliche to say this doesn't taste like an 8.4% alcohol beer, but this doesn't taste like an 8.4 alcohol beer. This is very drinkable. It's not syrupy in any way. It finished really low. The hop character comes through really well. There's a lot of fruitiness, but then there is also,
it's not an artificial fruitiness. It's still it's a hop fruitiness, I think.
And there's a resinous background that backs that up. There's a hop bitterness in there that really comes through. That's this isn't fruit juice. This is a beer, and this is something more substantial.
I agree completely. And there's a nice malt backbone to it too, so it's fairly viscous, and it drinks with some substance, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, this is I believe this is all malt, so we didn't do a lot of double IPAs would have some sugar in them or something like that, but we're looking for exactly that viscous mouthfeel. There's malted oats and malted wheat in it, again, helping to build that body, more protein. We do higher whirlpool hopping rates, I think, than a lot of other breweries. We've talked to a lot of breweries that are down around, and now I'm going to be that jerk who talks in half a pound per barrel. So that would be on the order of maybe 2 ounces in 1.5, 2 ounces in a 5-gallon batch, which is pretty light, and we're about 4 times that rate. We're up at maybe 6 or 8 ounces, I think, is around where that is. We're 2 pounds per barrel, 2.2 pounds per barrel. This was actually a little bit lower, but it was all cryo, the concentrated hops from Yakima Chief. The brewery we're working with can't use quite the same ratio we can at our brewery. Their kettle just is set up in a way that the hops tend to clog things up if you have too much in there. So we use those cryo hops to get more hop compounds in there, more bitterness. It doesn't drink like it, but it's calculated to be 105 IBUs or something like that.
I don't know about that, but I mean, there is a substantial bitterness there, but it's not like, the old arrogant bastard, bitterness.
Yeah. It's tricky. There are different bittering compounds you can get, and since this was all flame out, you don't get that sort of the tannins and the harshness. And then Scott's dug up some research that dry hopping can actually lower the bitterness, can pull IBUs out of solution. The green material absorbs isoalpha acid, and so it tends to pull it towards about 30 IBUs. If you have a beer that's very low bitterness, dry hopping will raise the bitterness. If you have a beer that already has a lot of isoalpha, it'll drag the bitterness back down. And so it's I think that's sort of one of the tricks for us for New England IPA is a lot of people see how low bitterness they are, and so try to keep the kettle editions very light. But then when you dry hop, it gives it sort of a different, harsher, more maybe tannic bitterness or something like that. And for us, it's important to start with a lot of isoalpha, and then even once it gets pulled down, it's still, to me, very balanced and drinkable. And
yeah, I mean, if you've ever made the mistake of chewing on a hop pellet, there is bitterness there, and it is a very back of the throat harsh bitterness that I would assume would come out if you massively dry hopped.
And particularly, I believe pellet hops will contribute more bitterness just because they've gotten often hot, and so their compounds are more available, versus whole leaf tends to add less bitterness because it's just sort of pristine. It hasn't been sort of beaten up in the same way.
And where do the cryo hops enter into that? Because you would assume that has even more potential to be the harsh.
Yeah, and that they cryo hops. So it's the green material that absorbs isoalpha acid. So cryo hops have less of that green material, so they reduce the existing bitterness less, and then would be adding at least as much pound, certainly probably more pound for pound, but a similar amount if you did half as much cryo hops as traditional pellets.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been fun. We've been trying to play with a lot of these different products. We've just did hop hash for the first time, which is kind of similar, I think, to cryo. It was originally marketed as sort of a byproduct of the pelletization process, that it would be sort of cleaned off of the machines. Yeah. But now that they're selling it in 10-pound bags to professional brewers, I kind of assume they're making it in some way, and because otherwise it seems like it would be a huge amount of loss that you would have, and T45 pellets, which are, so I don't know if you've ever gone to the show on the difference between T90 and T45. T90 is traditional hop pellets, and they're called T90 because 1 pound of hops, whole leaf, whole whatever we want to call it, and whole leaf isn't correct, it's whole cone.
Right.
Results in 0.9 pounds of pellets when it's done. T45 would only result in 0.45 pounds. So they remove a lot of the green material, and you leave a higher concentration of the oils and the resins. And so we've so far found the best results from blending them. So we won't do all cryo. We'll do a portion of cryo. It brings a more concentrated aroma, but it's often less delicate. It's a more dank, less fruity, more more oily kind of flavor. A nice boost, but not maybe the only character we want.
Yeah, this beer is, and again, this is the Snip Snap. It is less of a fruit juice and there is more of that dank, bitter hop character in there to balance it out.
Yeah,
where it's not. Not saying that New England IPAs are Alka Pops or something like that, but they can be juicy. I mean, literally taste like juice, which are delicious.
Yeah.
But this is, again, more of a kind of a traditional beer kind of character.
And then similarly on the water treatment, we do roughly equal amounts of sulfate and chloride. So we're about 150 parts per million of both of them. So we are not pushing it totally into that just fluffy, juicy, sweet kind of thing. We want some sulfate there to give you a crisp, bitter finish that sort of cleans off the palate and lets you get you ready for that next sip. I find that beers that are too sweet kind of just stick on your tongue. You almost need it's like eating ice cream. Like I need a glass of water with it to kind of clean off my palate, and I don't want that from a beer. They can be really fun beers to have a sample of, to have at a bottle share, to have at a festival, but if I drink one, I'm probably not going to go back for a refill of that same beer. It's maybe, hey, I'll have a Saison next or something like that. And our goal is generally to make beers that are drinkable, and for us that means a little bit more bitterness, a little bit sharper character.
Now you're also packaging sour beers as well?
Yeah, so that's been our current adventure. We just bottled our first sour beer, a Sauvignon Blanc barrel-aged Brett Saison. Maryland does not have a lot of sort of classic sour beers. There are a lot of breweries that do sort of the kettle sour thing or the fruit plus lactose plus vanilla thing. And there certainly are some places doing barrel-aged sours, but it's not a lot of places that do it as a large part of their production. And so for our first one, we did different Brett strains in each barrel, and we picked the barrels that we liked together and blended them. I think we took a little bit of a more unique approach. A lot of breweries, when they package sour beers, it's actually pretty close to the way home brewers do it. They often get just a gravity wine filler, so essentially it just sort of has a little trough on top, and then you just sort of push the bottle up underneath it, and it fills from the trough. They've already mixed in sugar solution, maybe some rehydrated yeast, maybe some conditioned yeast, and you can pick up quite a bit of oxygen just because it's not a closed system. It's like going into a bottling bucket. No matter how good you are, and if you flush it with CO2, but still it's got an open top, and some oxygen is going to get in there, and you can get some THP, tetrahydropyridine, which is sort of this Wheaties Cheerio sort of flavor in the finish that will eventually clean up. Some people are more sensitive to it than others, but particularly for bottle conditioning, it will eventually go away, but we've already been open for a year, and we've had people who paid into a club to get bottles of sour beer, and we didn't want to make them wait another 6 months and we honestly don't have a lot of space, so I'd rather not have to hold on to bottles for more than, say, 4 or 6 weeks if I don't have to. So we got a small tank that we can pressurize, so we get the beer blend into there. My understanding is this is how Sierra Nevada does their pale ale. It's bottle conditioned, but they add some CO2 first. So they pump in CO2 under pressure through a carbonation stone to get it to a certain target, and then they add yeast and sugar to get the rest of the way. And for us, it was particularly with barrel-aged beer, you often don't have as much carbonation as the calculator suggests you do. So if you put in the calculator that's at 70 degrees, it says you have 0.8 volumes of CO2. The problem is that rough interior surface of the barrel acts as nucleation points. It can also be that, hey, maybe at some point the barrel got warmer than it is now and it lost more CO2. At home, I would do sort of a rule of thumb that I had about half as much CO2 as the calculator suggested. So if it thought I had 0.8, I really felt I had 0.4, so I would overshoot by 0.4 volume. So I would put in the calculator, I want 2.9 volumes if I really want 2.5. But with this, we can get it cool, get it to 1.5 volumes of CO2, and now we just have to get from 1.5 to 2.5 or 1.5 to 3. And we got a little slightly more expensive, but I think probably better bottler from a company called Express Fill. And essentially you just hook up the beer to it, you hook up an air compressor, you hook up a CO2 line, you put a bottle on, you flip it to fill, a little foot raises the bottle up most of the way and purges it with CO2 for 3 or 4 seconds. Then it pushes up the rest of the way, pressurizes it to the same pressure you have going to the tank, and then fills it, counter pressure fills it, and then when it's done, you can flip it down to release. You don't have to do it immediately, so it'll sort of hold it there until you're ready to cap it. Flip it down, release it, hand it off, somebody caps it, new bottle goes on. It's not a fully automated system, but it does about four half-liter bottles a minute, and we're happy with it so far. It was the first bottling day was a little bit slow for a while. One of the fill sensors was going off, and so it wasn't working on one of them, so we only had 3 heads going at a time, and but it was about 7 hours to do 1,050 bottles. So We're still haven't figured. Yeah,
Still moving along.
yeah. It's I think you could probably get by with 2 people. We did 3. Somebody running the putting bottles onto the little sanitizing pump, taking them off. We had we sort of pre-racked like 4 or 5 cases of bottles so that bottles would have 5 or 10 minutes to really totally drip out the sanitizer, make sure none of that was in there. Sanitizers tend to be really heavy oxidizers. The more sanitizer you can get out, the better. And then and luckily after 2 weeks they are already, I would say, a little under 2.5 volumes, but they're carbonated. They form a head. They taste good. They look good. We'll give them another month just to make sure they don't get more carbonated, to make sure the flavors are good, to make sure nothing weird develops. But it's certainly a big relief. I was starting to have dreams about opening bottles and no carbonation, or opening bottles, and because it's one thing to open up 50 homebrew bottles and vent out a little CO2. It's another to figure out what to do with more than 1,000 of them.
Yeah, this is live sour beer. So, that's a variable that, normal production breweries, don't really have to worry about is there are microbes in there that are doing things, and you've really got to be checking on those things and make sure that everything is happy in the right way. But homebrewers should be maybe happy that, sour homebrewers may be happy that, if they buy a bottle of your beer, they get some of the yeast.
Yeah, no, we did re-yeast with wine yeast, but if you want to add it to a blend or something like that, it would certainly have live microbes in there. This one had some of my house culture that's the sort of cleaned up versions available from Bootleg Biology from time to time, and then we got some isolates from the yeast bay and did different isolates in each barrel so that we had a little bit of variety to blend with. I should say homebrewers can do a pretty similar setup to what we do with a keg if they want to. They could take the beer out of their 5-gallon barrel, put it into a corny keg, and leave it on 2 or 3 psi for a week or 2 in their refrigerator or in their kegerator, and then mix in the yeast and the sugar, and then use a little, either a beer gun or a counter pressure bottler. I used to use one of the little ones from More Beer, and get a very similar. You can purge out the bottle, you can fill it. I think it's more important if you wanted to, say, do a dry hop sour beer, or if you had like a really bright fruity beer that you didn't want to oxidize at all. But usually being a homebrewer is nice because you can just hang on to the bottles for a couple of months until they're good, and there's no real risk. You can keep checking in on them. Where what kills me as a brewer is like most of our beer is kegged, and so like, hey, if a beer is 8 weeks old and it's not tasting as great, we're down to 1 keg. And we have a new pale ale that's ready, we'll pull off that last keg. There's no point in trying to sell the last keg of beer when it's not the best beer you can give. But once you start selling cans, somebody's going to trade them. We still see check-ins. I think this beer's held up pretty well. It's a little more than a month in the can. I'm still seeing check-ins for the beer we did a month before that, I've still seen some very positive reviews, but it's certainly getting to the point that they're not going to be fantastic in the way they were fresh. It's been off tap now for more than a month. It's time to go, and the bottles will be the same way, that people hang on to them and trade them and save them to have with friends. And I hope that they keep getting better. A lot of sour beers improve with age, but I think we've all held on to bottles a little too long and then been disappointed.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, and as a brewer, you're letting your babies go out in the world, and they're being handled in ways that you can't control, and then people are tasting them and putting their feedback out there on the on the social medias.
Yeah, and Untapped and Facebook and Instagram are and we get people say, oh, you could advertise our magazine. It's like, that's not where anybody's looking for beer information anymore. Right? People are looking. Yeah, online and social media, they want to, hear an interview with the brewer. They don't want to read some copy from the marketing department about, that's a big part of it. And we've so far done pretty well on Untapped, but a lot of that is just that it's easier for us to give someone good beer because our beer isn't going out there in the world. If you have had our beer, it's usually at our tasting room. It's been in a pristine glass, it's been hopefully well informed, it's been fresh, lines are cleaned every 2 weeks. It's not, I grabbed that 6-pack at the supermarket and I didn't check the date, or the date was in some, Julian calendar code and I didn't know how old it was. Of course, beers like that are not going to be as well regarded. The breweries that really have the best ratings tend to be direct sales, on premises,
My brother-in-law was going to Washington, D.C. I live in Colorado, and it's summer, and it's 100 degrees, and he put it in his trunk and brought me back this beer, and it's not any good.
And you just, and honestly, nobody likes getting a bad review. No one likes seeing a beer that they worked hard on get a 2-star review. I wish when people gave a bad review, particularly if it was at a location other than the brewery, if they would just put in, sour beers aren't my thing. Because I'd like to know that rather than, wow, it tasted super buttery. Okay, maybe there's something wrong with the line. Maybe we need to go over there and talk to them, or maybe we need to talk about their line cleaning or talk about not sending them beer anymore. How well is it being handled? And you get a little sense of that. There are some places we send kegs to that a half-barrel keg of double IPA is gone in a week, and there are some places where it's still on 6 weeks later. I'd rather send beer to a place that went through beer quickly, had clearly people who were excited about our beer. It gives me a bad taste when I see a lot of bad reviews from a particular location. It's not necessarily their fault, but it's if you have 90 beers on tap and people aren't particularly excited for our beer, it's going to sit there longer than it should.
So let me ask you this: you gave a seminar, a pre-conference seminar, right, on sour brewing.
Yeah.
A guy like you who wrote a book, turns out 5 years ago, which Steve and you thought it was like 2 years ago.
I thought it was brand new.
So did I.
I got like 10 copies at the store.
No, I thought you, and I literally said, you put this book out, what, 2 years ago?
3 years ago.
And he's like, no, 5. 5, it's crazy. Anyway, so you give a seminar, to all these homebrewers. You've been around for a couple of days. Are you learning stuff? Have you learned new stuff here from tasting homebrews and talking to homebrewers or talking to some of the other commercial brewers? Can you still come to events like this and learn new stuff?
Yeah, I was actually, today, about 2 hours ago, there was the seminar I was most excited for. One of the big questions I had in American Sour Beers was, I'd anecdotally noticed that when you bottle condition beers with Brett, they very quickly get funkier. That's something I'd noticed. That's something a couple other commercial brewers had mentioned to me, that, we don't have much of that funky, earthy, horse blanket, hay, whatever flavor, and then it goes into bottles, and then 2 months later it's there. And so the guys from Escarpment Labs up in Canada did a test where they did the same beer, 2 different worts with 2 different micro blends, both sort of Brett Saison-y kind of things. And they, again, I'm probably going to butcher this. You should probably have them on instead of me to talk about. They did one that was left just totally no pressure added, no, open. And they pulled samples, I think, after it was a month and 4 months. They did another one that the whole time they had a spunding valve on to keep it at 15 psi. And they had one that after 2 weeks they did sort of a standard open fermentation, then kind of like you might with bottle conditioning, although they put 15 psi on it and then left it at 15 psi. And they found that there seems to be something interesting going on with that middle one, where it got pressure after 2 weeks, that there were higher levels. They ran through a gas chromatograph of a couple of the sort of funkier molecules. No sort of definitive answers on exactly the physiological cause of it, but it seems like there's something to that you might, it's not just having pressure, it's maybe pressure after the initial blast of active fermentations going that makes the beer brettier, for lack of a better word. And so, those kinds of things are fascinating to me. I don't know that it's going to change anything. I mean, there's all sorts of other arguments for bottle conditioning, oxygen scavenging, and just having a product that's alive and is going to change over time and all that. But it was interesting to know that we shouldn't be getting a spunding valve. We have one from Air that we only do sour beers in, and we've been giving it 2 or 3 weeks until the gravity's stable, and then kegging it and sort of like bottle condition, leaving them with sugar for two or 3 weeks until we start tapping it, but then we'll leave the rest of it warm and put them into the cold room as needed And so it keeps evolving, and it keeps getting a little more sour, a little more funky, a little bit more interesting. And it's fun and educational for beer drinkers because they can try sort of a fresh Berliner Weiss, and then by the time it's gone, it's 2 or 3 months later. It's a little funkier, and that Brett character's coming through. But it doesn't seem like there's an argument for getting a spunding valve for the fermenter. There wasn't, and I mean, so it doesn't change anything we're doing, but it gives me an avenue that, hey, this isn't a necessary, investment to make. Or it's always exciting to try. I just had a sour beer at the Milk the Funk meetup with muscadine grapes, so that was like really fun.
Yeah.
That's an idea I'd really been interested in, and every once in a while I'll see them at the supermarket, but I'd never actually made a beer with one, or I'm sure I might have tasted one at some point, but it was really good, and so it was exciting, and it's just another one of those ideas on something kind of local-ish, at least in sort of the Maryland, Virginia area. That's not sort of prime area, I don't think. It's a little bit further south, but we still see it sometimes.
Yeah, down in Arkansas we call them muscadine. So you find them in the woods.
Oh, yeah. I get several customers a week. I got me some muscadines I found out by the creek.
Yeah, you get your muscadine, and you can. It definitely has there's a muscadine flavor that is nowhere else. And there's some wineries in Arkansas that make muscadine wines. They tend to be really sweet.
Yeah.
There's a couple that do a dry. It could actually make quite a good wine, but there's the Chateau Ozark in Altus, just outside of Altus, does a dry muscadine wine that's actually very good.
And it's spelled Aoxarc, Ozark.
Yeah, that was the original spelling. When the French owned Arkansas, they spelled it Ozark, A-U-X.
Yeah.
And Post is another family-owned winery down there that makes a muscadine wine that my stepmother likes. It's very sweet, and I like it in very small quantities because it tastes just like muscadines.
Yeah.
But it's really too sweet for me to drink in any large quantities. So
yeah, but that's the hard thing with sour beers is they take so long that it's I think more important to get inspiration or confirmation for something before you do it full scale. And so just being able to try those fun, weird ideas. I mean, that's honestly one of the big issues with commercial brewing is that we have to get approval from the federal government to use interesting ingredients. And so it's like, is it even worth the effort of getting it approved to, putting in the, I mean, luckily it's all online now, but I've already tried to do a couple of fun things I've seen other breweries do and got rejected. So I don't know if they're just clamping down more or if other breweries just aren't doing their, getting that approval because it's, TTB is, 7,000 breweries. I don't know how closely they're paying attention, but
that's what club night's for.
Yeah.
We had a pizza beer yesterday with tomato and basil and rosemary and
Italian seasonings
and again it was well done and in the size of cups that we have it was really good, but I don't know that I would have order a pint after pint of the pizza beer, but boy, I'm glad that I had it.
But that's honestly, I mean, that's even for commercial beer, that's where the market's going. I think it's one of the best times to have a home brewing background and be a commercial brewer because the emphasis isn't on consistency and being spot on a target. It's about new, unique, fun, exciting, miss it this week and you might not ever get to try it again. And for us, it's been fantastic. Every Thursday, we try to put a new variant on. So either it'll be this week we did a gin barrel aged version of one of our beers, or we'll do a stout with freeze dried strawberries and chocolate and vanilla beans, or and some of these things are just they're financial messes. I mean, freeze dried strawberries are like $35 a pound. So we added we did a Neapolitan stout, and we made 15 gallons of it. Had $70 worth of strawberries. $25 worth of cocoa nibs, $10 worth of vanilla beans, and we sold it for the same price as the base stout.
Right.
But really, it's about bringing people in, and for us, it's about trying out flavors. And hey, if this is a real hit, maybe then we can look into ways to do it on a larger scale, or maybe it's just, whoa, this was fun, or this was. And there've been a couple of those that because we have a 20-barrel tank, we'll do a double batch of something. We'll keg off a full 10 barrels, plain. Double IPA, pale ale, and then we'll take whatever's left, 5, 6, 7 barrels, so a couple hundred, 200 gallons or so, and then do one of the ideas we've done before: grapefruit peels, orange and vanilla, Next week we're doing one. This is a Scotch special. A lot of breweries have done sort of the white wine juice with an IPA kind of thing. Trillium does a couple of great ones dialed in with Sauvignon Blanc or Gewürztraminer or something else. We did an all mosaic beer, and people often talk about mosaic being kind of a little blueberry kind of flavor. I've never gotten that really strong. Sometimes I'll get just a little hint of blueberry. But we did Lambrusco wine juice, which has some darker, fruitier flavors in an attempt to push that blueberry, juicier thing. I'm not sure it's going to be a hit, but it's this, it's hazy, but then it's red, and it's got really big kind of dank, fruity mosaic thing, but then it's got this almost like a red wine, fruity kind of thing behind it, and it's really fun. I'm excited for it, and it's not going to kill us if people aren't, super excited. We don't have a huge amount of it. And if it's a real hit, hey, it's something we could do more often, or could eventually can, or whatever.
Well, it's kind of a luxury to have a tasting room.
It's almost I do not know how any I don't know if you were at the keynote last night with Dan from Maine Beer Co.
Yeah.
And they're just talking about starting a nano brewery that was all bottled beer. Most of the keg beer we sell to bars is pretty close to at cost. It's really more of a marketing thing. Just with the prices we're paying for Citra and Galaxy and whatever, but when you sell in the tasting room, you're making $6 on a $7 beer or something like that. It's when you go to a bar, you're supporting the bar. When you go to a brewery, you're supporting the brewery.
But I was thinking more for. There's a financial side, but then there's also the one-to-one customer interaction. They really, how it's the focus group. You have a focus group where people come and pay to participate.
Yeah, and we can really tell, that we have regulars. Often our on-tap score is never higher than after that first Thursday when all the regulars try a beer and they all love it and they all say great things about it. And then it starts sinking down as that same beer is on 2 days later on Saturday when it's more maybe people coming out for a day, or we pour it at a festival and it's just random people trying beer and checking them in, or at other bars or restaurants where it's people don't get the full experience and don't get the explanation from someone. That's partly the reason we don't do sample flights at the brewery. We do half pours for half the price. So most of our beers you can get a 7-ounce pour for $3, which I think is relatively reasonable. Plenty of breweries sell samples for $3 a pop. But so many of our beers, I don't want someone having 8 beers in front of them and having 1 ounce of each and drinking in the little cup where it's up to the rim. I would rather you got the full experience in the big glass, the half pour, and there have been numerous occasions where someone will initially be like, and then bartender will come back 10 minutes later and they'll be like, I'll take a full pour of that one. It's sometimes a lot of beers that aren't just over the top, fruity, juicy, chocolate, vanilla, whatever, take a whole time to grow on you. Your palate needs to adjust to them. And you don't really appreciate them until you've had a little bit more.
And the temperature has a difference as well.
Yeah, and I think it's good because it stops people who know they don't like something from trying it. If somebody hates sour beer, I don't need them getting a flight with 3 sour beers and then rating them and saying these sour beers are terrible. I don't like sour beers.
I don't like sour beer.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of 1 or 1.5 star reviews on Untappd that just say the best sour beer ever. Or my favorite sour beer, or something like that, and I'll respond and be like, "Oh, you still didn't enjoy it?" Yep, I don't like sour beers,
Yeah.
And it's I guess I started in an earlier, a more civil age of online beer rating, where there was sort of this expectation that, much like a BJCP competition, if you know you don't like porters and you drink a porter that you think is this is actually okay, you give it a high score because for a porter, you really enjoy it.
Right.
Because what then turns into is that beer ratings are really just about style popularity and palatability. That almost everyone likes New England IPA, at least a little bit. It's not super bitter. It's got fun, fruity, bright flavors. There are very few palates that would reject it wholeheartedly, in the same way goose might be rejected. because some people just are not going to like sour beer, and so goose is never, unless in a way, and that's something that sort of the tasting room does, it artificially limits the people who try the beer. Because you have to come to this one place, you have to go out of your way, you have to drink it, versus, if you could get our beer on the shelf at 100 liquor stores for $1 a pop, a bunch of people are just going to try it just for the novelty of it and maybe not enjoy it. But if you have to wait in line to get a can, or you have to be in a club to get the bottle, or you have to be there on Thursday night when the variant is tapped to try it, odds are you're going to be the sort of person who enjoys that a lot more.
Yeah,
I think that's a big secret to how some of these breweries have gotten such high ratings, is because if you have to go to the source, if you're going to Treehouse and waiting in line for 2 hours to buy cans, you probably like their beer.
Very few admit it if you didn't.
Yeah,
you just wasted 2 hours of your life.
Particularly if you're planning on trading some of those cans, you'd want that, make sure that beer was rated well so that you could get a good value in return. Being cynical.
Well, yeah.
And in the same way, I'll be cynical. I have a bunch of guys that I've gone to all their houses and had bottle shares the last 5 or 6 years. They will sometimes not rate our beers because they don't want to give it. They'll give us an honest, good review when they like it, and they'll hold back that review, or whatever. They'll bump it up a little bit because they like us and they want us to succeed, and they don't want to have us be whatever not pleased with them. But that's never something I would I'm not telling people to go out and rate our beer, but just Give brewers a break. We're all trying our best,
Yeah.
Beer has gotten a little bit mean-spirited, I think, in some places. I've definitely seen, some local breweries that maybe started out with one kind of beer and sort of have evolved and gotten much better. Still, just have people that post mean things on their Facebook pages, or it's like a Mean Girls kind of thing. We have a local Facebook group that talks about local beer scene, and 99% of the members are fantastic and friendly, and there's a small minority, like everything, that are, just have a grudge against some brewery and are going to, anytime they put a new beer, say, that's junk. Or we did a collaboration with one of our best friends who's been a home brewer for years, fantastic palate. He still home brews despite being a commercial brewer. And one of the comments was, I guess that'll be their first drinkable beer. Like, come on. They're good people. They make good beer. Yep, they've changed what their beers are over the years, and they're doing great stuff now.
I would say it's the anonymity of the internet, but people say that stuff when they post who they are. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just the same way that it's easier to honk at somebody in your car than it is to yell at somebody on the street.
Yeah.
You're not looking them right in the face and having to say. No one comes into the brewery and says, "Oh, it's great to meet you. Your beer's trash, and I hate you." But they'll post that at the Sapwood Cellars Facebook, which I run, and
If you're standing in line at the post office and you accidentally bump into someone while you're standing in line, chances are they're not going to try to punch you. But if you are in a car and you accidentally bump into someone, they're going to get out of the car and try to murder you. So it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Now, in just a short period of time, if you were to, since it's been 5 years since you've done your your American Sours book, is there a chapter that you would add, or is there, how would you amend that book?
I actually was just chatting with Christy, the publisher for Brewers Publication, just saying, hey, it's been 5 years. I've started kicking around some ideas. The big things I got wrong were lactobacillus making alcohol. Lactobacillus can make a little bit of alcohol, but not more than a couple of tenths of a percent. The Sac Trois thing, the White Labs eventually came out and said their Brett Trois was actually a Saccharomyces, so that was another one that I got wrong. Lactic acid yeast, which I can't remember if we've talked about on the show before, is super exciting. Matt Bachman at Wild Pitch Yeast Co. and Maniacal, a bunch of university labs have started finding these yeast strain that will do the fermentation and make lactic acid, sort of a one-stop shop. It's a little legally tricky at the moment. There are a lot of these university groups that are trying to patent the process. They're not patenting the microbe, but the process of using the microbe to make sour beer in this particular fashion. So a home brewer probably doesn't have to worry about commercial brewer. There could be a lawsuit if you're using a proprietary process.
Crazy.
Yeah, I'd probably put a little bit more onto kettle sours. There's a little section on that, but that's become such a huge thing. we just did our first one, a hoppy IPA, and so the idea was that we could kettle sour, and then when we heat it up to 180 to pasteurize, we add kettle hops, and then cooled it back down, fermentation, dry hop, so forth. So it wasn't just a dry hop flavor, so we could get both sort of the kettle and the dry hop. All New Zealand varieties. We did Waimea and Waiiti, so it should be super limey and stone fruit and Sactois fermentation. And then just all that new information that's out there between the Milk the Funk group and the Sour Hour podcast and just all these fantastic sour specialist breweries that have opened, from the ones that are doing, the Rare Barrel and DeGard, they're big, to these little weird fun places like Floodlands Brewing up in Seattle that's just like tiny and weird and delicious and totally focused on local fruit and their house cultures and all that stuff, just like totally focused. And new places sort of popping up everywhere. And obviously I'm going to have in the next couple of years a lot of just sort of more day-to-day practical knowledge on how to deal with barrels, how to deal with fruit on the sort of scale I'm now dealing with. Just the sort of questions I didn't know to ask because I never had to deal with volumes larger than 5 or 10 gallons, and now I'm dealing with 200 pounds of sour cherries, and how do you deal with that? How do you get that separated from the beer? How do you and just production flow? Like we're using a lot of plastic. They're called flex tanks. They are just sort of big plastic totes, but they have the traditional tri-clamp attachments, and so we'll put sour beer into those, and then it can hang out there until the barrels are ready. So we just did an Imperial Flanders Red, a Vinda Cereal that we were going to put into port barrels from a local brewery. from a local winery, Linganore Cellars up towards Frederick, Maryland, and because the government shut down, they were delayed in getting their label approval, so they're delayed in having the barrels emptied, so we were delayed in getting the barrels, which is all totally fine. I mean, they should not change their production schedule to suit our needs, but we had a place to stick the beer because we'd brewed it already, and we could add some microbes and get it sort of started, and then, hey, as soon as the barrels are ready, we didn't have to deal with cleaning the barrels or sanitizing them. We picked them up the day they were emptied. We put the beer in that day, ready to go. Nice. And that's just something as a home brewer I just never really dealt with. It's honestly not a bad idea, to have the beer in the carboy before you get the 5-gallon barrel, but it's a little bit easier to time one carboy, and everybody's got carboys, and it frees up our fermenter.
So it's... The beer is incredible. The conversation is incredible. I feel lucky to have the opportunity to talk to you. I have to follow your progress and to follow all the knowledge that's coming out, and it's just always fun to get together and chat, and I appreciate you're taking time, and I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate us staying together over all these years. And I hate to think you were first on the podcast 14 years ago.
It was right before I moved to DC, so 2006. So yeah, almost 13 years ago. It was before I started the blog. It was before everything. Yeah, please find an excuse to get to Columbia, Maryland, and we'll do a collaboration. We'll brew something, or we'll blend something, or we'll put your face on a can or something like that.
That's all I need is my face to be more round.
It slicks back the sides.
Oh, man. Guys, thanks. Steve, thanks for sitting in.
You're welcome, James.
And Mike, as always, thanks
it's a pleasure.
Thanks for the knowledge. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for the friendship.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see you tonight at Club Night and around.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again to Mike and to Steve of stevesbrewshop.com. I got a love you man vibe going there in the end. Beer. It's a goal of mine to travel to Columbia, Maryland, to visit Sapwood Cellars. I've got an interview scheduled with the other half of Sapwood, Scott Janish, to talk about his book, The New IPA. Looking forward to that, so stay tuned. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. And thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. That's all until next time. Till then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.